talking all things theatre and events.
We created all of the creative captions. We put them all into the programme.
There's so many people out there who make such an effort to give back to young people trying to start up again, and it's absolutely fantastic.
So shows that would have been at Sadler's Wells or Birmingham Rep or sometimes National Studio and stuff like the day before, and then would be in a community space in Gloucester the day after.
The Stage Is Yours podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Stage Is Yours podcast with me, your host Carl Graham, joined as always by producer Dan, here to talk all things theatre and events. Joining us on the podcast today is Christina Poulton, Chief Executive of Striker Light. Striker Light do amazing work in making theatre accessible to everyone, supporting artists from all over the industry to make amazing pieces of work. Christina joins us today to talk us through everything Striker Light and their incredible work. Christina Poulton, the stage is yours. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. Yes, it's full on, which is weird, given the current situation. But yeah, it's nice to be here. Nice to see
you. So you're from a company called Striker Light, for those who don't know, who are a Gloucester-based organisation. So if you just give us a little bit of an overview of what Striker Light is and what you guys try to do.
Yes. So we used to be a festival, which is a lot easier to explain because people get that. So we've been kind of looking at, particularly now where everything's different, we've been looking at kind of different ways of describing who we are and what we do. And it's about working with artists and companies and communities in Gloucester to create exciting events and projects that usually happen in unexpected places or non-theatre spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is great. And you're obviously, unfortunately, Gloucester's not blessed with a great, as a particularly well-known theatre hub, I think is how I'll phrase that. Yeah,
it doesn't have like a traditional arts infrastructure. So it doesn't have like a theatre royal or a playhouse or a kind of standard art centre as such. And it's had quite a few years of kind of disinvestment from traditional arts funding and touring as well. If you look at touring maps, quite often it was a black hole. But what's then kind of happened in that gap is there's a lot of kind of people creating their own stuff and communities who've been creating their own events for years without worrying about the fact that wasn't there. Which started off for us at the beginning. We were like, there's not a theatre and we need to try and create theatre spaces. But actually it's become something, even if now there was a brand shiny new theatre built, the strength of what we do comes from working in different communities and being in non-theatre spaces and the way that you're able to work and the people that you're able to meet through doing that.
Yeah, absolutely, which is great. I think trying to create theatre that's not meant to be in a theatre or not, that isn't stuck to a theatre, I think is great, and almost taking performance and art into those communities, which is what you guys really sort of specialise in, really, which is great. So you guys work with artists from all over the country, I think it's safe to say, and bring in lots of different stuff in. So you've got working partnerships with a number of different organisations across the country.
Yeah, so it's artists that either are touring their work, obviously pre-COVID would tour their shows to Gloucester. So we had quite a lot of shows that would have been at Sadler's Wells or Birmingham Rep or sometimes National Studio and stuff like the day before, and then would be in a community space in Gloucester the day after. There was, as you all know very well from the time that you've worked with us, yes. There's a whole process of how you translate that and make that show possible in that space. But then the payoff obviously is the kind of quality of engagement you get with that. So audiences who would never normally set foot in like a big spangly theatre will be in that space because it's their space and will love that show and be a part of it, and will be meeting the company and chatting to people in a way that just wouldn't happen normally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you've touched on the work you guys do bringing these shows into Gloucester where there isn't a theatre as such. It's comes with its very own unique set of challenges to make that theatre as accessible as possible for the people that you've got or the communities that you go and work in. So I mean, you guys had Frankenstein be with
so Beatbox Academy,
Beatbox
Conrad
Academy.
Murray's show, which was a Fringe first. They were touring internationally. We hosted a work in progress of that, and the group performed on the car park rooftop in Gloucester at one of the events as well.
Yeah, which is great. So you guys get, like I said, and you got that really early doors before it took off and became the kind of phenomenal sensation that it kind of became, which is great. And kind of, but like I said, you guys took that right into the heart of the community, and from that you've stemmed a number of different workshops and outreach kind of programs.
Yeah, and Conrad's brilliant. Like, he's such a great advocate for us, and a lot of that is because he genuinely loves that aspect of working in the arts. So there are some artists and companies where it's just not the right fit for them, and that's okay. Like, their work is made for different kinds of spaces, and we always have conversations with companies beforehand about, this is the setup, this is what to expect, but the kind of payoff for it. So like Yomi Sode's show Coat, which was at the Roundhouse and toured nationally, that came to a community centre in Gloucester, and he was saying it felt like the most significant show to date because the audience that he'd written it for were there, and it was their space, and everyone was coming up at the end like meeting him and hugging him and wanting the script and all of that kind of stuff. So it's not about kind of dumbing a show down or kind of trying to be all generous and bring art to the community. Like, it's basically about how can we get rid of some of the rules and structures that are there that don't always serve a show best. So there's lots of stuff that about going to the theatre that actually doesn't work for lots of people, about the fact that if you turn up more than 5 minutes late, it's terrible and you have to sit in the dark and not speak to anyone, even though you're spending the evening with people and it's supposed to be a sociable thing. And we've actually adapted the format of a lot of events based on audiences saying, but I want to come with my whole family and I want to catch up with people beforehand. And so we'll quite often have events where there's like food or music and time for people to chat beforehand, and people kind of rock up when they want to. And then the show itself is still a really key part of that, but people are having a whole enjoyable celebratory evening out, which is kind of sort of what you think theatre should be, but actually a lot of the time isn't. It doesn't feel kind of social and celebratory a lot of the time, I don't think.
Yeah, I think there are certain... I think theatre could become that kind of thing that people will go see a show and that's it, and kind of sit there, watch it, appreciate what they're seeing, but they're kind of... And then the notion of, you go for the dinner before the theatre and then you do this, but the idea of bringing that as to one kind of event, or one event's the wrong kind of word, but the one kind of thing for people to come to and they can do all of it in one go is great. Yeah.
We had an event where because of the format of it and because of the context, we were able to be flexible in a way that you couldn't in a traditional setting. That was part of Black History Month, and a woman said at the beginning, she was like, I've got a poem I want to read, can I read it? There's no way you'd be able to do that in most contexts, but because of the setup of the event, we were like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And she kind of stood up before what would be seen as the main show and read her poem, and it was absolutely the highlight of the evening, and people were absolutely in that audience were absolutely loving it, were completely with her, and it just made that evening. But it wasn't something that we planned in.
No, absolutely. And I think having that kind of adaptability and flexibility to your events just gives them that whole different level of accessibility to everyone. And that story of her reading that poem is the fact that she's from that community as well, and not just the guys see the show, I think strikes a massive chord with everyone who's there.
And I mean, I'm not doing a kind of in the good old days type thing, but in terms of where theatre comes from, you know, even like traveling theatre and stuff, people would be really excited because it would be coming to their community, it would be part of their community. You know, performers would stay with that community, they'd all eat together, like part of that kind of, the whole kind of thing about being with a community has kind of gradually been taken out, I think, and that's something that we are able to put back into those events.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings us nicely onto kind of Striker Light's work in and around accessibility, and not just kind of in all aspects, really. So, and touch around some of the work that you guys do with that, in terms of you guys work in just about every kind of way to make things as accessible as possible for everyone, I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always way more that you can do. But in general, if you're trying to make something more accessible, I suppose there's a couple of things there. One is about working with people. So if it's trying to make it more accessible for people who've got young kids, or trying to make it more accessible for a particular community, or making it accessible for people with particular mental health needs or stuff like that, working with and talking to people who experience that about what they want to see and how they want that to work. But then also that most things that you do to make something more accessible for a particular group very often will make it accessible for more people in general. So, you know, if you're doing something so that people can take part if they have a particular disability or particular mental health needs, then very often that can just make it more accessible for people that might not have been to the theatre before, or might not, you know, respond to the traditional setup in a really positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even just from the very, like you touched on there, the very simple nature of taking that into their community, into their and for a lot of the communities, certainly Gloucester, from my time with Striker Light and the communities we worked in, their communities very much centre around those community centres, and whether that be a church, village hall, community centre, wherever that is, that's forms very much a part of their hub in their community. So bringing that very simple step of bringing something into that and seeing it in there, and not trying to kind of completely transform it into a theatre and make it not look like their hall, I think starts even from those very simple steps. And then, like you said, moving on into your, whether you've got people with various mental health access needs and various things like that, that start to really grow and kind of move forward.
Yeah, and it's about being able to let go of stuff. And a lot of the, you know, I've done a lot of front of house in my time, and the idea of a show going up 2 minutes late like makes me feel queasy. But that kind of stuff about, you know, we have to do things like this, do you? And so if you are working in community spaces, you're in those people's spaces, they know how best to run an event in their space, they know what people are going to respond to. There's got to be a kind of working together on it where you are able to then be flexible about how things work and how things don't. And I've definitely got a lot more chilled about that over the time of working with Striker Light. So for like really early days, we did this event and I was trying to run the box office, and it was one of the first events I'd done with Striker Light, and I was just like, it was like everything. It's like, you know, when you have those event dreams where everything like is out of your control and no one's listening.
And everything
it was kind of like that, except it wasn't really going wrong. It's just that no one was following any of the rules that I was expecting, and people were kind of running in and out, and they were like, oh, and I was saying, have you got a ticket? And they were like, but this is my family, I've brought them along, I'm in the show, how can you, like, why am I charging them money to see me? I live with them. And and in the end I just had to let it go and just be like, you know, this is what this event is, and it's okay. No, I mean, that's not, you know, that's not every event, but that was quite an extreme example. But yeah, it was the beginning of a process of chilling out about the rules that have been drummed into us in terms of working in theatre, that this is how you do it.
Yeah, I think that's very much absolutely spot on with the kind of how I think everyone who came to work with Striker Light at some point has had that initial moment of, okay, yeah, we'll come in and you've got your idea of how you want it to happen. And for the most part, that's how it will go. But then, yeah, every now and then you'll get those unusual situations and you just kind of, like you said, adapt to it and you go, actually, no, that's what this is here for. And whether it's, I mean, All Nations Centre in Gloucester was certainly one of mine. Working with that community was massive eye-opener of how that community operates and works, and trying to run that show and kind of think of that and just having to go, well, do you know what, we'll just go let it happen, let it go.
It was kind of a marker of success that one of the events we did there, we had someone come to that event, and at the end of it they were like, well, I just didn't know what was happening, I didn't know if it started, I didn't know. And I was like, yeah.
We feel the same.
It's part of the joy. we had one where people loved the show so much they were messaging their friends and saying, come and see this, which, you know, from a, like, on its own, from a theatre perspective, like, that's, you know, people spend however much on marketing, that's what you want to happen. You want people to be dragging their friends to it, going, you have to see this. But it just meant people were turning up all the way through. And Ellie, who was looking after front of house, was getting more and more twitchy, because she's like me, where she's got that front of house background of this is how it has to work. And she was like, right, that's it, no more latecomers. And then the door opened and she got up to be like, you can't come in. And someone invited their grandmother. And there's this kind of like beautiful old woman who was there at the door. And I was like, you're gonna have to let her in.
There's just certain people that you can't turn away. But no, and I think that's great from that, like you said, just making this into these communities where it's not something that happens on a regular basis for them, and then it really does become something that they all massively get involved in, which is amazing. I'd like to talk about Striker Light's co-creation and your kind of initiative and program around that.
Yeah. So I think this has kind of come out of more and more of the work that we've done. And I've been aware of it while we've been talking now. Mm-hmm. It absolutely can't be about us being like the arts saviors and being like, oh no, you have no arts, here, have some arts, we know what's best. Like, that is just, and everything about that makes me really uncomfortable. And, you know, kind of, I've been giving examples all the way through, but it's about bringing together our knowledge and expertise and the knowledge and expertise of that community about how best to do this and how does it work, and sharing that decision making. So in terms of, you know, from like right back to what shows are going to work to where do we program them, how do we program them, and the more we work on it and the more I'm kind of immersed in it, the weirder it feels that the kind of traditional setup is that you have an artist or a company over here on their own who make a show, and then they go to an organisation and say, oh, please program this, and then the organisation's like, oh, okay, yes, we will, because there's that weird imbalance of power between artists and organisations that's been massively highlighted over the last 6 months or so. And then the organisation takes it and then separately goes, we need to find an audience for this, and where are they? And is like shouting out into the ether, being like, please come to this show. And so what we've tried to do is just flip that on its head and start with us and communities and artists in the same space saying, okay, what are we going to do? And that the decision making from the beginning is shared, so that the knowledge and expertise of that community is valued from the beginning. So in terms of what the content is, how it works, all of that decision making, that isn't us second guessing what we think is best, because we're the art saviors. It's what's going to work and what's not. And again, it's that thing about letting go of stuff that's been drummed into you from the very beginnings of working in the arts, of but having to be responsive and flexible and waiting to make decisions or letting other people make decisions or sharing decision making. It's against a lot of the ways that we do stuff, of like, you know, you must have a project plan and it must be really detailed and it must be down to the like, you know, last minute of this is what's going to happen when and how. And it isn't saying you don't do those things, but you don't do those things in isolation.
I think it's great that you guys are utilizing what's within that community, because the people within that community know what that community want. So,
Yeah.
and just bringing that, and then, like you said, bringing in the expertise from Striker Light to go, right, we're going to not tell you what to do, we're just going to tell you, help you, and help
Yeah.
you grow whatever it is that you come up with, which
Yeah.
I think is great. And kind of touches on I've seen recently through your social media, your thing around artists and paying artists for being an artist.
Yeah.
Which I've mentioned to a few people, and they kind of look at me very blankly and go, and I'm like, yeah, they're just paying them for being an artist.
Yeah.
There's nothing else attached to it, which some people find very strange, but I
Yeah.
think is a wonderful initiative.
It's one of those things that shouldn't be revolutionary, but yet it somehow is. So Ben, who does our marketing, used the word radical in the thing, and there was a lot of kind of debate on Twitter about, is it radical? But actually it kind of is, and it shouldn't be, but it is. We when we launched it, we were like very niche Twitter celebrities for a while. And it just went crazy in a way that nothing else we've ever done has. Because as soon as lockdown started and it became clear what the kind of support structures or not were going to be for the arts industry, there's always been a bit of a artists feeling like venues hold all the power and make all the decisions, and there's an imbalance there, and it just massively exacerbated that in the way that the pandemic has with pretty much all kind of systemic inequalities. For the arts industry, it pulls all of those kind of ones to the fore. So it's basically that most organisations don't think twice about employing someone to do their marketing. And yet, even though they're an arts organisation, most organisations don't employ artists. And the artists are in this kind of treadmill of applying for call-outs and grants and things, all of which are criteria set by other people, and try to make their work fit into those, and they never get to just create stuff. So it's literally an experiment. What happens if you employ and pay an artist for a year to be an artist? And what does that do for the what does that do for the work that they create? And straight away people start kind of saying stuff like, well, what if they don't do anything? And it's like, well, what if you employ someone to do marketing and they don't do anything? Like,
if you employ someone to do marketing and whatever they choose to do doesn't market it, then that's the exact same thing as an artist not producing anything. But I think and we pay other people on time in rather than output, whereas artists, we only pay them when they've made a show. Once they've put all the hard work in.
So all that kind of planning time, thinking time, all of that kind of stuff, which would allow people to engage with communities in a way that the touring structure just doesn't allow for, would then be paid time as part of it. And then if you did have all the time, so when you put together like a bid for a project and you're like, oh, we're going to have 4 weeks rehearsal because we want to work. So there's a show, for example, that we've been supporting that's working with new parents and babies. And so they have X number of days to engage with those families as part of the development of the show. And that number of days is dictated by how much they could fit into the funding bid. It's not dictated by what they actually need to do that well.
Want to do it,
And imagine if you could get to a point where an artist creates a show and by the time they've done it, they have the whole community behind them going, yes, this is brilliant. And they're already messaging their friends saying, you have to come and see this because it's owned and created together.
No, I think it is. I think it is really great. And it is the term of radical, but is it radical at the same time?
Imagine if you paid an artist in the arts.
Is the absolute right way to describe it, that it's everyone else gets paid for what you do. And as an artist, like you said, a lot of the time that pay is offset way beyond should your show get somewhere. I think it certainly caught my eye, and like you said, it certainly caught a lot of people's attention. So I think a lot of people will be very watching and kind of interested to see quite what does happen and how it does ultimately work out, which I think is great.
What we're doing with it is we're making sure that each stage of it is transparent. So we're like publishing planning notes and notes from the meetings we've had with artists and partners and stuff, so that if other people want to do a version of it, that they can.
Yeah, no, I think it is really great. It is really great. Carrying on, you touched on a little bit of obviously into the pandemic, and obviously it's had a massive impact on the industry as an absolute whole, and still does. Slow signs of things possibly starting to move in the right direction currently, but whether that stays the right way, we're not sure. So how have you, Strike a Light, and yourself found the pandemic? Obviously, once the initial hit has happened.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun week. We had 3 sold out shows that week, and then Boris was like, "Oh, don't go to the theatre. I mean, you don't have to close them, but don't go."
Yeah.
And it was still that bit of it might not be for very long and all that kind of stuff. And we had like our own version of, is it the Cobra meetings or whatever that they had? We had our own version, and we had like the whiteboard up, and we were like, right, all the things that are happening in the next 3 months, and who's going to look after what, and empty the fridge and close the office. And I only took like a couple of things with me because I thought we'd be back in the office in a couple of months' time. Yeah. It's like, oh no, I don't have that. That's at the office too. It was weird at the beginning because we didn't immediately respond with anything for audiences. And I think the first kind of 3 to 5 months, we were just going on instinct. So we just rang up artists that we would have been supporting or working with, and we're like, what can we do together? How can we support you? What do you need? And we kind of realized a couple of months in, and I had a bit of a moment of like, should we be putting out some digital stuff? Everyone else seems to be putting out digital stuff. But then in a way, I'm glad that we didn't, because I feel like everyone just needed a bit of time to work out what was going on first. And it wouldn't necessarily have been good, or who would it have been for, really?
I think so, yeah. And at the point, it was a very saturated market, because like you said, a lot of people went to it, which was great, but everyone did. And I think potentially a lot of really good stuff actually might have just got lost in the sea that became.
And I'm not a fan of, like, the theatre is live for a reason, so if it's going onto a digital platform, that it needs to make sense for that platform. And there are some shows that do that really well, and some that it just really struggles with. So we kind of didn't put, and we did like artist commissions for working in communities and stuff on a small scale, but we kind of didn't put anything out until the autumn. And then we had a couple of days where we just sat down and were like, what shall we do? Like, what are we? What are we for? What's the arts for? Should we just be, doing a slung low and just putting all our staffing into running food banks and stuff? And we just kept coming back to the thing of, all the way through lockdown, people have needed creativity for connection, and to keep them going. And so what can we do in a sense where we would normally be doing a season of shows? So we'd normally have, say, up to 12 touring shows come into Gloucester, and all of those would be based in community spaces and with engagement around them. But we just sort of flipped it on its head, and rather than starting with the show, we started with artists and communities. And so there's, it's ended up being about seven, I think, community producers who have been working with local artists and national artists. And their brief was basically create something that your community needs right now. And there's been a real range of different projects through that. And a lot of it's stuff we've never done before. So one of the ones which has been brilliant was a fashion show, so involving like local designers and local dancers, but then working with Dani Harris-Walters, who's an incredible choreographer and dancer that we've programmed before. So we did a bit of kind of matchmaking between community producers and national artists and local artists. And it just means that we haven't had a big organizational saga every time the rules have changed, because each community has responded to it depending on what their community So some of those communities were like, everyone's out and about anyway, they're here at these events for free food, so we're going to carry on with outdoor workshops. And some communities have said, everyone's really scared, no one's leaving their house, we're going to postpone this, or we're going to do it digitally. So when second lockdown happened, all of them were just like, okay, we're going to adjust this, and it was like sorted in a way that we couldn't have done if we'd been carrying a whole program of shows that we were trying to squeeze into that time.
Yeah, I think, which is great. And I think still being able to get out and produce and still offer something to those communities that you support and the artists themselves as well is great. And I think a lot of companies were caught out by, and a lot of people were caught out by the second lockdown of going, yeah, great, and kind of going for lots of things, and then unfortunately being somewhat caught out and obviously not being able to go ahead, or still having to postpone it all again. Which is a real shame. But I think it is great that you guys have found a way to adapt and adjust it. But I think that's where the strike light kind of model and idea works in your advantage in that sense.
Yeah, because it's flexible from the beginning. And I suppose that because we don't have those structures and we don't have those venues, that does give us a flexibility that I know is much harder for organizations. I'm aware of how kind of lucky we are in this setup in terms of we're able to do that because we're not stressing about having to make everybody redundant. It feels slightly odd being really excited about what we're doing in this time, because I'm aware that for some organizations it's such a really awful, bleak time.
Yeah, I think like I said, I've talked to quite a few different organizations and people over the last few weeks and months, and everyone's got a very different story, and it's in fact affected people in different ways. But there is an overarching theme that people, certainly now, certainly once second lockdown hit, of finding ways that actually they can make the most out of this. And even just a simple talking to some companies, and probably myself a little bit, lockdown came at a time when actually we just needed a break, some time off to kind of go and relax and kind of do that. And I was talking to a theatre company that I've done quite a few bits with at the Fringe, and they were saying actually it's the first time they've gone into rehearsal for a new show having everything planned, and it doesn't feel rushed, and it doesn't feel like they're stressing because they've had all this time suddenly to kind of work on it. And they're going, actually we're going to adjust everything we do going forward to make sure that we've got that. We're not trying to run before we can walk in it with a production and events. I think everyone's finding a way to make it work for them.
Yeah. If you can't smash the system once the system's up, pause, when can you?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So it's a weird time, but it is great to hear that you guys have managed to find a way to kind of carry on and still keep supporting and your local communities more than anything else.
Yeah. We were talking, again, Ben, who does our marketing, was chatting in staff meeting this morning, and he was saying, I'm just aware I don't have a lineup ready for spring. And we were like, it's because we don't know what's happening yet.
Yeah, no one knows. Yeah, it's slightly kind of weird future that no one's quite sure what it is or what it's going to be. But
yeah, and we said for 21-22 that we're going to program artists rather than shows. So working with artists and whatever they're working on, whatever community producers are interested in, rather than, and it might be a show, but it might not. But it just means that we're still paying and supporting artists through that as well.
Yeah, which is great, and kind of brings us on to the last kind of topic and stuff of that, which is kind of the future for you guys, which is what you've just touched on there, of rather than supporting a specific show, it's, and kind of links into your artist, kind of paying an artist to be an artist as well.
Yeah.
That you're just going to kind of focus on the support for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think the overriding thing is that we absolutely aren't holding on until everything can go back to normal, because there's lots of things, every single event that I think I've been to in the last 10 years that's a kind of, discussion, theatre based thing, someone's talking about the fact that small scale touring is broken. And it's not something that's got better. And a lot of people would say it's got worse. So we're not looking to jump straight back into programming in the way that we were. And hopefully if we can be a bit provocative of, what if you pay an artist for a month instead of paying for a show, because actually, sometimes the costs are comparable.
Yeah.
And what if you try this, and what if you don't make a decision until the artists and the community have met each other and chatted, or all those kind of things. But then we've had big debates about so Emma Jane, who co-artistic director who leads on our programming, and me ended up at kind of opposite ends of like this kind of spectrum, where I'd got to the point where I was like, no more shows ever, we'll just have artists and communities just hanging out, and EJ was like, but actually and there is, there's a reason I work in theatre. Like, I still, if I walk into a theatre, even, proper full on like red curtains, I get a little tingle. Like, shows are incredible, beautiful things, and you can do stuff within that with that level of structure and preparation that you can't in other contexts. There's something between having everything open-ended and just kind of, creating stuff on a very local level, and actually kind of providing a platform for the stuff that artists can create, which you could say to someone, what do you want to do, or what do you want to see? And a lot of the most amazing stuff that I've seen in my lifetime, I wouldn't have dreamt that up, because I don't have the artist brain, and that's kind of the point. So it's making sure, there's a phrase that I think I stole from Situations about making space for the things you didn't know you needed until you saw them. So what we're trying to work out is how we put that back in, but still keep all of the community-based co-creation, artists and communities working together.
No, I think it's great. And it's exciting that like the potential of what things can create. And obviously your artist support could then lead to shows for Emma Jane at the other end of it. And then you kind of almost end it with kind of that cycle that works. You get not only the artist support through that month, but then a show as well.
Yeah. And that's what she was saying, like, someone like Danai, who has shown work in progress in the All Nations Centre, where people in the audience were absolutely responding to that show, and has since worked with local groups and worked with community producers. If he then brings a show, we're not going to be like, oh well, we can't because it's a finished show, because it's going to be brilliant, people will love it. There's people, but I think again it's that long-term relationships between an artist and a community,
which is great. And I think that's kind of obviously at the heart of what Strikelight is and trying to do going forward, and has been in the past, and a massive variety to that as well, which is great. So we'll move on to our very last thing. These are our 3 questions we ask everyone on the podcast.
I meant to think about these and come up with something clever.
I know it's great. Like sometimes the kind of on the spot answers are hilarious, but
you will get my genuine on the spot answers now.
That's great. So the first one is, if you had a dream show that you could work on, that you could program, that you could produce, just be involved in, what would that be for you?
Am I allowed 2 answers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most people have. I think I've only had one person so far give me an absolute definite answer.
Okay, so one of them would be absolutely in line with the kind of Strikelight work, where it would be like a massive, probably outdoor extravaganza that communities and incredible national and local artists had created together. But just of a scale that we've not done before. So I think, was it National Theatre of Wales that did show in Port Talbot?
I think so,
but like that kind of, taking over, like, so no one in Gloucester doesn't know that it's happening. And then the other one is, I still, as you know, have a massive love for ballet, for musicals, for the exact opposite end of the spectrum. And someone sent me the kind of behind the scenes video from the Olympic ceremony opening games, and the DSM calling that show, like I was genuinely crying, because it's just like the artistry and the precision and managing that whole thing. So it would be to DSM some big kind of Olympics / ballet / musical extravaganza.
Amazing. That's great. I love that. The Olympic ceremony was something else as well. I think even that, and the fact that there is somewhere, I can't remember where it is, I'm pretty sure there's a video that it is the opening ceremony with the DSM call track, so you can watch it and the audio is that, and I'm pretty sure it's around, I've seen either it was a section of it or that, but it's popped up on a couple of podcasts that if you ever had a DVD of a show, there should be an optional extra that you could watch it with the comms call track and hear what's going on. That's been a couple of things, so I'm going to kind of see if that's a thing that I can kind of get going. There's been quite a few people going, oh, it'd be really exciting to hear it, and I'm like, okay. I mean, you'd have to find the right show to do it, where everything goes perfectly and there's none of the usual comms stuff going on, but I was like, it's quite interesting.
When I was about 10, I think, and we used to live near Leicester, and I won a competition. I think it was the Haymarket Theatre, which is one of the ones that's closed down through this as well.
I think so, yeah.
Oh, I just realised that connection. That's awful. But it was to be able to stand backstage. So I was stood at the prompt desk and I was able to like hear and see them doing everything. And it was just incredible. That's great. Love it.
So our second one, and this is probably the most random one, but stems from just a conversation on a stage once that I had a few months ago. After an event or a show that you've been involved in, what's your go-to snack? That one thing that after a show you just go, yeah, that's what I'm having.
I did think about this one actually. It's got to be potato based.
Okay.
I think it was after we'd done Rooftop Festival for the first time, and we'd been like shifting thousands of chairs in the rain, crying, like just being like, what we really need is a production team. And we went and got chips from the chip shop, and I'd never had curry sauce because I thought I didn't like it. And then Ellie made me try it, and I was sat in the back of the car and she was like feeding me chips and curry sauce, and it was amazing. Or hash browns.
Great. Or hash brown. That's a great shout. That's a great shout. Mine's just Malwam, because there's always Malwam in my toolbox whenever I want to show for just a sugar boost.
Do you have a little compartment for your Malwam?
Yes, actually in the lid.
Amazing.
And our final question, if there's one piece of knowledge or advice that you know now that you wish you'd known 10, 15 years ago when you were starting out and thinking of this as a career, what would that have been?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, like if I was telling myself, I spent quite a lot of time thinking that the point I needed to get to was the biggest organizations, and that I would have arrived and got where I needed to in my career when I was working for big national organizations. And actually, when I was working for an organization like that, it just wasn't right for me, because everyone had their own jobs, and I'm genuinely happiest when everyone is like pitching in together and everyone can put in ideas. So I think it's that you don't have to try and build your career trajectory around getting to the biggest thing. It's about finding the way of working and the place that you're happiest. And for me, that's strike a light away days when everyone's together planning stuff and chucking in ideas, and then we weren't able to do it this year, but usually we'll like all stay over somewhere so we can like work right through, but then all cook dinner together and then sit around in our pajamas.
I think that's great. I think the notion of be where, or find a place where you're happiest that suits the way you work and the way you are is absolutely great, and not kind of assume that just because it's the top of the industry or the biggest company with the biggest budget that it's going to be the happiest place to work. I think that's great. I think it's been really nice having you on our podcast and chatting through things today. No worries at all. It's been great. And best of luck with everything with Strike a Light going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stage Is Yours podcast. Want to know more? then head over to all of our socials. You can find us at Stage Is Yours Pod, where you can catch a cheeky glimpse at some of our upcoming guests, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to make sure that you never miss an episode. This has been the Stage Is Yours podcast, talking all things theatre and events. Until next time.